Welcome back. We previously reported on how companies are importing foreign guest workers and sending jobs overseas, even with historic numbers of Americans looking for work. It's part of an immigration system and trade policy that critics say undercuts American workers and bolsters corporate profits. Now we turn to new allegations of massive visa fraud and giant loopholes that critics say are allowing high-tech multinational companies to discriminate against Americans. It's a story that begins in a small-town courthouse in Alabama. Hayneville is 20 minutes outside Montgomery. Home to just over 1,000 people, it was long known as a stronghold of Jim Crow. But in the 60s, this rural corner of Alabama became a front line in the struggle for civil rights. And now the courthouse has become the proving ground for a new kind of civil rights battle.
You ready, Skip? Yep.
It centers around a lawsuit filed last month. The attorney in the case is Kenny Mendelson, a Montgomery lawyer who can often be found here at Chris's Hot Dog Cafe during lunchtime, talking legal strategy with his law partner.
If I told my grandparents something like 30, 40 years ago that one day I'd be representing a white guy suing the Indian company for discrimination, I think they thought I was out of my mind.
Mendelson has a client who's suing a company based halfway around the globe and a world away from Alabama. Emphasis Technologies, one of the largest companies in India and the world. The high-tech giant is the crown jewel of India's outsourcing industry. Emphasis has contracts with Fortune 500 companies in the U.S. like Walmart, Home Depot, and Goldman Sachs. The company does everything from customized software systems to accounting. But not all the work is done in India. The company also brings thousands of Indians to work in the United States for jobs that used to be done by Americans. Attorney Kenny Mendelson says he'd never heard of Emphasis until he got a phone call last fall from an Emphasis manager, an American named Jay Palmer, who said he'd discovered that the company was flouting immigration laws by bringing in computer programmers from India. Palmer said he filed an internal whistleblower complaint, but that the company failed to fix the problem. Instead, Palmer said, Emphasis chastised him for refusing to be, quote, a team player. Last month, Palmer hired attorney Mendelson and sued the company for retaliation. Palmer declined to speak to us directly or even provide a photograph. His lawyer says since the filing, Palmer's been targeted with death threats.
I'm fixing to go into a meeting.
Word of the court case spread fast, Mendelson says, and some of the thousands of guest workers here from India were not pleased by the allegations.
What I've learned through this, and we have overwhelming documentation to support it, is that Emphasis has a system of getting around our visa laws and sending employees over to America on a B-1 visa, which is basically a tourist visa.
B-1 visas, also known as business visas, are supposed to be for foreigners coming to the U.S. for meetings, negotiations, research, or training, for which they are not being paid. And as the U.S. consulate in India warns, under the B-1 visa, quote, business does not mean gainful employment.
So there are a serious number of people over here basically doing work on illegal visas.
To get a B-1 business visa, visitors must file an application with the U.S. consulate and provide supporting documentation. That typically includes a letter of invitation detailing the length and purpose of the trip, which cannot include full-time work. That's the law. But according to Palmer's lawsuit, Emphasis was sending employees to the U.S. in direct violation of immigration laws, and Mendelson says they have the documents to prove it. For example, he says the company's internal website had a page for employees applying for a U.S. business visa with a link to download a list of do's and don'ts that, he says, helped employees to obtain B-1 visas improperly.
They have a specific set of don'ts. Do not mention activities like implementation, design, testing, consulting, etc., which sounds like work. In other words, they tell them don't say anything that makes it sound like you're doing work. The reason is that B-1 visa holders are not allowed to do work in the United States.
Mendelsohn says the company's marching orders are laid out in black and white.
And it says in bold capital letters, do not tell them you're working. Speak little English.
And Mendelsohn says they went beyond that. He says Emphasis asked his client to sign letters of invitation for visa applications that he knew to be inaccurate.
Essentially, they were asking Jay to lie, to tell our government that this particular individual was coming over here for meetings when in fact he was coming over here to work.
Mendelsohn says Palmer was asked to sign letters like this one, inviting an Emphasis employee from India to attend, quote, business meetings and workshops where he would be, again, quote, making a presentation on quality assurance, a 2-week trip. In reality, he says, that employee was actually coming to write software on Mr. Palmer's project in Chicago. And as this document shows, he planned to stay for 6 weeks as per the project plan. Knowingly presenting a false invitation letter to the federal government, according to the immigration attorneys and officials we talked to, is a felony, which is why Mendelsohn says his client refused to sign them. We wanted to verify and discuss the allegations and documents with Emphasis, but the company declined our request for an interview or to comment on the material we obtained. They did provide this statement, quote, we are aware of the lawsuit filed in Alabama by an employee. We believe in conducting our business with integrity. As a result, we take these allegations seriously and are investigating them thoroughly. Some immigration attorneys argue that what comprises work is a very gray area in B-1 visa law. When we asked federal immigration authorities for clarification, we didn't get much. A State Department official told us in an email that the B-1 visas do permit what they called limited professional services. And while they said the department can't track how visitors are using their B-1 visas once issued, we were assured the vast majority of travelers use them legitimately. But according to several high-tech industry veterans we talked to, misuse of B-1 visas has been an open secret for years. But never before, they said, have the allegations been laid out in open court, at least not like this.
What's significant about Jay Palmer's case is that he documents the lengths that these companies will go to, including breaking the law to avoid hiring Americans.
Donna Conroy is a tech worker activist in Chicago who's been in the industry over 30 years.
We have an unemployment rate that is through the roof, and yet they chose to violate visa law and implement the business visa in order to fill these job openings here in the United States.
Conroy says you don't have to take her word for it. Check any internet job board in India, and you'll see, she says, that it's not just Emphasis sending workers to the U.S. on B-1 visas.
It pulled up 98 B-1 visa job openings. They're all requiring these technical professionals to also have a B-1 visa.
And some of the companies might sound familiar.
IBM Daksh Business Process Services. For the mentioned position, candidates should have a valid B-1 or B-2 visa with minimum 1 year of healthcare domain experience. Candidates would be part of a knowledge transfer team and would need to travel to U.S. immediately.
In layman's terms, Conroy says, transfer knowledge is training that allows companies to move work done by Americans overseas.
This is right here a want ad that specifically states exactly how they need these visas, and they need their workers to come to the United States and be trained in order for them to successfully ship that job abroad.
And the B-1 visa is just the tip of the iceberg. She believes every year companies use and abuse a whole alphabet soup of visas to import thousands of foreign workers to fill American jobs across the country.
We have job openings in Charlotte, North Carolina, in Atlanta, Georgia, in Des Moines, Iowa, in Troy, Michigan, that are calling for H-1B only, that are calling for OPT only, that are calling for B-1 visa holders only. And right in the title, the message is clear. No Americans need apply.
Most troubling, Conroy believes, is that under most of these visa programs, it is perfectly lawful.
So it's also legal for companies to displace Americans from their jobs in favor of foreign citizens that these companies have hired through these corporate visa programs. This is what we want to fix.
Conroy's rolling out a counteroffensive inspired by the protest tactics of the 1960s.
Instead of a national sit-in, it's going to be a national apply-in. We're going to be reposting these job openings on our website. We're telling Americans, if you're qualified for these job openings, we encourage you to apply.
Her group hopes that bringing attention to the wide number of high-tech companies who they say are abusing visas of all kinds will force the federal government to protect the rights of American workers facing discrimination.
Companies are saying that we're fat and lazy and unqualified for these job openings. In fact, we even had an Indian outsourcing executive say that Americans were unemployable. That's all to cover up the secret that these companies are not seeking local talent and will do anything to avoid hiring American talent.
When it comes to guest workers in the high-tech industry, what's legal and illegal is a matter of hotly contested debate. What we know in the meantime is that the federal government issues tens of thousands of new high-tech guest workers visas each year, and those are just legal guest workers. And when it comes to the millions of visitors on tourists and business visas, what they're doing here is anybody's guess. We'll be following this story in the weeks ahead, as we have in previous programs. If you have experienced discrimination like that which has been alleged tonight, send us an email at viewer@hd.net. Now, just ahead, celebrating a significant milestone in science. That's when we return. Civil rights. And now the courthouse has become the proving ground for a new kind of civil rights battle.
Ready, Skip? Yep.
It centers around a lawsuit filed last month. The attorney in the case is Kenny Mendelson, a Montgomery lawyer who can often be found here at Chris's Hot Dog Cafe. Welcome back. We previously reported on how companies are importing foreign guest workers and sending jobs overseas, even with historic numbers of Americans looking for work. It's part of an immigration. It's a story that begins in a small-town courthouse in Alabama. Haynesville is 20 minutes outside Montgomery. Home to just over 1,000 people, it was long known as a stronghold of Jim Crow. But in the 60s, this rural corner of Alabama became a front line in the struggle for system and trade policy that critics say undercuts American workers and bolsters corporate profits. Now we turn to new allegations of massive visa fraud and giant loopholes that critics say are allowing high-tech multinational companies to discriminate against Americans. During lunchtime, talking legal strategy with his law partner.
If I told my grandparents
something like 30, 40 years ago that one day I'd be representing a white guy suing the Indian company for discrimination.
Yeah.
I think they thought I was out of my mind.
Mendelsohn has a client who's suing a